What is up, you guys? This is JP, and in this video we're going to be talking about workout bands. So ever since the coronavirus hit and people have, been forced to, do home workouts and kind of makeshift things on their own, workout bands have been a pretty popular workout modality for people wanting to get gains. Now, I actually obviously you can watch the video and you can see that I'm currently in a gym, and I've been fortunate enough to be in a gym for the majority of the lockdown. But there was still about a 5 to 6 week period where we got shut down and I had to kind of makeshift stuff on my own. Now, I was still more fortunate than the average person, even when we did get shut down, because I had a barbell, I had some plates, I had access to a little bit of equipment, but I did still have to make use of bands. I had some weights, for example, for a deadlift, and with my barbell and with plates, but it wasn't enough for me to actually be challenged. So I had to put the band over the bar, step on the band, and then do deficit or banded deadlifts to kind of make it a little bit harder. But my point is that I had to use bands in a lot of creative ways because they're just, I had to get a good workout in, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are in the same boat. But this kind of prompted me to kind of make a video about bands and talk about not really the pros and cons, but are bands good for a lot of things? So the main difference between bands and free weights, for those of you who kind of just really don't know, is that obviously free weights are going to be, they're a resistance because of gravity. So when you're working with a barbell or you're working with a dumbbell, the resistance is straight down. It's not any other direction. It's not like cables, so they're straight down. Look at a barbell bench press or look at dumbbell curls. The resistance is straight down. So you kind of have to change your body and manipulate and move around your body if you want to work with different angles with free weights. Cables are a little bit different. They kind of function like bands in the sense of you can have the line of resistance any way that you want. But for workout bands versus free weights is you can have the line of resistance pretty much in any direction. It doesn't need to be straight up and down like dumbbells are with gravity or free weights are with gravity. This could be horizontal, perpendicular, at oblique angles, and that's one of the good things with bands. The other main difference from bands and free weights is that obviously there are different parts of the range of motion when you're doing an exercise with free weights where it's harder or easier, but generally the resistance for free weights is not going to change throughout the exercise. Like for example, if you're doing a 20-pound dumbbell curl, the 20 pounds is always 20 pounds. Now that's the second major difference between free weights and bands, is that for a resistance band, the further you stretch the band, there's actually increased resistance for you using that when you're doing the exercise. Now again, this isn't one of the crazy facts that nobody knows about. It's pretty much most people who have worked with bands know this, is that the more you stretch the band, the harder it gets, and that the less you stretch the band, the easier it gets. So the actual resistance is different depending on how far the band is stretched, which may change how difficult it is through the range of motion for whatever exercise you're using. So that's pretty much the two major differences, is the resistance compared to free weights and the angles that you can use them in regards to free weights. And that's what largely makes the differences between the two. Now, what do I personally think about bands? Now, I think bands are good for formality. So you can kind of use them in any form. You could take them wherever you want to go. So especially during this time where people don't have access to gym equipment, you can use bands wherever you want to use them. You can use them at home. You can take them to a friend's house. They're easy to just kind of move around, and for you to just make do with what you have. They're not obviously it's hard to bring around a bunch of weights. It's not very practical to carry around a bunch of dumbbells. So bands are good for that reasons, and that's why, again, any negatives I do say in this video, I don't want you to take away the negatives and say, okay, well, I shouldn't use bands even though I don't have any free weights because they're not as good as free weights. Well, no, you got to work with what you got and you got to get the gains that you can get. So That's one thing that I do like about bands, is you could take them anywhere. The second thing is that, at least right now, bands are probably one of the few things that, depending on where you're at, they're kind of like the more costly solution. I don't know if you guys have checked on like things like Let Go or Amazon. Free weights are absurd prices. So again, it's virtually, impossible to get at decent prices. So that's also what makes bands more appealing, especially right now. Now for training, in regards to training, I do like bands for specific exercises, so their effectiveness. So it depends on the exercise. So if you're talking about specific exercises like a banded side step, banded side steps, banded abductions, I like bands for exercises like that. You can feel them a lot better. They just have a specific, how do I say, the resistance curve for bands and those exercises, it just works better personally and subjectively. I've used them with clients, and anyone who, has used bands at all has most likely tried them for a banded side step or a banded abduction. And I like bands for that specific reason when you're doing these types of exercises. So depending on the exercise, it can be very beneficial and they could be very useful. But in other exercises, bands can kind of really be not that practical. Let me give you an example. A face pull. At first, when I tried a band or used a band with a face pull exercise, I didn't like I thought I would have liked it for the face pull, just with in theory in my head. I'm thinking, okay, a face pull, when you're pulling the resistance, whether it's a rope and cable or a band, I thought, okay, I like how maybe peak tension is going to be where your hands are by your head during a face pull. And I thought that would be, in theory, a good idea, because it reinforces that end range motion position there for a face pull. But when I actually tried it myself and I had a couple clients use it, I just found it kind of hard to apply progressive overload on the face pull. And because a face pull is a relatively large range of motion, I found that the first half of the face pull was not really challenged, because again, like I mentioned earlier, when you're using a band, it kind of goes from, depending on what band you're using, relatively easy to pretty hard very quickly. So the first half of the face pull was not really challenged that much at all. And then the last half of the face pull was challenged a little bit too much. So I kind of found the strength curve on the face pull not really good. So certain exercises may be very beneficial for bands, again, like the banded side step, and then certain exercises I just feel like were pointless, and because of the resistance curve of the bands, it just did not work, and I felt like it was kind of, it was like a waste of an exercise with the bands. So that's why I think in certain circumstances bands could be better. Now there's other uses for bands that I also like. So for example, if you're someone who competes in powerlifting, or you're someone who competes in a sport where it's a weightlifting sport, not specifically weightlifting, but a sport that involves lifting or resistance training, I think bands could be used for manipulation of strength curves to kind of plug weak points. Let me give you an example. If you're someone who struggles with a lockout on a bench press, you could set up a bench press where bands are applied so that at the top of the bench press you actually have the most resistance, and at the bottom of the bench press you have a lot less resistance because you're already strong there. So again, in theory, that's actually a good way that you could apply bands on a bench press, so I think it's good there. But again, I think that fact in using bands in that way, it kind of gets a little bit carried away. I see people who will throw bands on anything for the sake of bands because they power lift or they compete in this, so they just start throwing bands on everything. So let me give you an example. If you don't have a weak point in the bench press that you can visibly see, let's just say you don't have any major glaring issues. Let's just say you might have issues, but they're kind of like on a day-to-day basis and they change. Then I don't think you should just start throwing bands on everything, and you might not even touch bands, period, for bench press. So I think they can be beneficial for you in, plugging weak points, but I think generally you shouldn't just start throwing bands on everything. So I think you have to be careful in their utilization, and I think people can get carried away with bands. Now, I think the last benefit of bands is kind of like odd uses. One of the best that you can do is obviously assisted pull-ups. So if you're someone who struggles with pull-ups, you buy a heavy set of bands to help you with pull-ups. This makes pull-ups very practical. I actually have a lot of female clients who they want to do pull-ups, but they can't do regular pull-ups, and then negatives are just a little bit too hard for them because not everyone can do negatives. It's just too difficult, and it's going to cause too much DOMS or delayed onset muscle soreness. So in that sense, you wouldn't want to do that, and then bands can come in a lot more handy. So there are a lot of kind of off reasons where bands can be very beneficial, like in the assisted pull-up example that I gave you. But overall, again, I like bands. I just think that you kind of have to be careful with their uses, and there are many instances where they can be beneficial. I think the one thing that you should just remember when using bands for something is ask yourself a couple questions. One, why are you using them? So say if you're using a band on a bench press, if you're like, okay, why am I using these? I'm doing this because I want the top part of the range of motion to be more difficult. So always ask yourself why you're using them, and then kind of sit on that question for a little bit. The second thing is, do I really need to use the bands for the first reason? So if you're like, okay, I know I'm using bands for the bench press to make the top range of motion harder, that's a good reason, but then ask yourself the second question was, do I actually need to do that? Do I have an issue with my bench press there? Is that really something that or am I just kind of making this a weird strength curve for no real reason? Because again, a study did look at strength curves, and there really was no benefit of strength curves, at least in this study, over traditional strength curve training or regular free weights. So I just think you have to be careful where you utilize them. If you guys have any questions, comments, leave them down below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.